Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. This is part one of a three-part series with Dan and Cristine Brite. Dan has a 23-year career in law enforcement and is currently in charge of the wellness program at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Cristine is a 20-year law enforcement veteran, currently serving as a sergeant in investigations, also with Douglas County. In this episode, Dan and Cristine share their experience of working in the same agency and responding to the same call where Dan nearly lost his life at the hands of a shooter. Let's listen in as they tell their story.
So I got hired with Douglas County Sheriff's Office in 2014. Had worked for two previous agencies before that. When I came to DCSO, a very short amount of time in detentions, short amount of time in patrol, and went straight to investigations, where I was very fortunate enough to be in their plainclothes unit, the impact unit. It was one of my career goals to be in that unit, and great camaraderie, great brotherhood, sisterhood within that tight group. And then September 2nd, 2016 came around. It was a Friday morning. Labor Day weekend was coming up. I remember waking up, taking my daughter to school. And one of the things her and I had talked about that I never really even paid much attention to is when she got out of the truck to go to school, she says something to me that she rarely tells me. She's like, "Be safe today, Dad." And I didn't even catch it. I didn't even give it any attention. I'm like, "All right, I love you." And then she went on and I went back home. It was about 2:29 p.m. when the call came out of a homicidal, suicidal subject that was loading up his RV with ammo cans and several types of weapons. Also being a part of the SWAT team and being on impact, I was called out there to initially help try to control the scene until more resources came in. When I had showed up, the suspect had already fired off a round in the property. Don't know why or the circumstances with that, but he then got into his RV and he started driving towards a middle school. So the location of where this happened was there was within a couple hundred yards, there was Parker Hospital, a rehab facility, a middle school, and an elementary school. So there was a lot of soft targets that we were really concerned about because they didn't have the capacity to defend themselves, right? And so, the schools went on lockdown. Parker Hospital went on lockdown. And then we showed up as the impact team with the whole focus of just locking him onto his property until negotiations arrived, which my wife, when she'll speak to, was a part of at that time. And that was our whole goal, was just to lock him there, try to talk to him and kind of resolve this peacefully, right? When he started driving towards Sierra Middle School, he saw the roadblock. He stopped his RV, flipped it around, and went back to his property. And that's when impact followed him back onto his property. Because our other concern was he was going to get into the house, and we didn't know what other kind of weapons he had. We didn't want it to turn into a hostage situation. We didn't know who was in there. So he wanted to really lock him down just into his RV. So he pulled into his driveway, came to a stop. And how I had positioned my truck is it was basically between the RV and the house because I was going to let him get back in the house. And the rest of the units kind of fell in behind him and on the passenger side of the RV, kind of forming a horseshoe shape. When I got there and I stopped, him and I were the only ones that could see each other. So we immediately began exchanging gunfire. He had an AK-47 with a drum magazine on it, and I had my AR. And we began exchanging gunfire. He had crawled up into that overhead cabin that RVs have where the bed is. He had crawled up in there, laid prone, and was shooting out of that top window. I was kneeled down in front of the left front tire of my work truck when I got hit about 4 inches below the left armpit, the one part that the vest does not cover. Got hit, fell down, and I continued shooting back at him until I had went unconscious. I went down. My team went into their training, started assessing it, providing cover fire. Right around this time, a lot of different things happened at the same time. The RV takes off and heads towards Parker Hospital, which was a big concern for us. So some members followed him there. Other members, including the SWAT medic, stayed behind, rendered aid, threw me in the back of the truck, and eventually got me to Parker Hospital. At the same time, the suspect was driving around through the field. He had crashed right in front of Parker Hospital, the ER entrance. And then he got out and began shooting at citizens in the hospital, just indiscriminately, just shooting. A Parker PD officer got on scene and immediately ended the threat. No other citizens were hurt, thank God. I got into Parker ER, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Bertocchi. I don't know if you've heard that name, but he's my hero. And then actually, I keep encouraging him that he should probably get a restraining order against me because I love this fella so much. And there's a reason why I love him, right? He came from Queens, New York, and they dealt with gunshot and stab wounds to the chest on like a daily basis. He was very familiar with a procedure they call emergency thoracotomy, and that's basically where they get access to your heart and they massage the heart with their hands, right, as a last-ditch effort to try to get the heart to beat again. When I rolled into the ER, he did an ultrasound, found out I didn't have a heartbeat, and he immediately went to massaging the heart, right, cutting me open, breaking the ribs, getting to the heart, and massaging it to where if it started beating on its own again. So then they took me from the ER to the OR to do a bunch of other surgeries, and that's where I had died a second time. Dr. Bertocchi, they tried those paddles that they put on both sides of the heart to try to shock it back. They did that 4 or 5 times. Nothing worked. And I've talked extensively with Dr. Bertocchi about this because I wanted to know like everything that went on. And he even said that, after we tried those paddles, they were obviously against time, right? Like they had to get something figured out quickly. And he even asked all the people that were in that emergency room, like, is there anybody have any other ideas? And nobody had any. So he went back to what he knew, which was massaging the heart. He got it to beat a second time. And that in part is why I love him so much, is because he didn't give up on me. At any time during all that, he could have called it and said, we can't save him. Because he had given me a less than a 1% chance of survival. So it was already pretty low, but he refused to give up on me. And that's why I have such a tremendous amount of love for him and the hospital staff, because there are so many side stories of people that went above and beyond to keep me alive, right? Like the janitor that threw on his running shoes because he had to transport blood from one floor to the next and just go nonstop because I needed so much blood. There's just a lot of amazing stories like that, of people just coming together and not giving up and just trying everything that they can to save my life. And that's where I have a tremendous amount of love for that profession, and especially for Dr. Bertocchi. I had stayed in Parker Hospital for 5 weeks in ICU. I was in a coma for 10 days. On the 11th day, which was September 11th, the community, a ton of strangers, right, people I didn't even know, a community that supported police, filled that that Parker Hospital parking lot and did a big prayer vigil. A few hours later, I had woke up from that coma, really unaware of what happened. My last memory was driving back from Texas from SWAT training, and I thought I got in an accident. I have no memory of the shooting at all. Interesting thing that the brain does, right, is it kind of blocks out some of that trauma. So I had thought I got into a car accident, and then Christy had told me, hey, you were shot, and I didn't believe her, and comes the anger and the frustration, right? Like some points they had to actually restrain me in the bed because I just wanted to go. I had no idea what kind of condition I was in. And so 5 weeks in Parker ICU, and then we went to Craig Hospital. That was right around in October. I went to Craig Hospital, which is a rehab facility here in Colorado. They basically teach you how to live life in a wheelchair, how to navigate obstacles, how to take care of yourself, how to cook, how to get in cars, how to get in planes. Like they do a really good job of preparing you for life in a wheelchair, right? Amazing place. I love them a lot. I went there in beginning of October, and I remember the doctors there. I had asked them, when can I go home? And they had told me, maybe 8 or 9 months. And I wasn't pleased with that answer because I meant I had to stay there through Christmas. And to me, that wasn't going to happen. And so they said, well, in order for you to leave, you have to prove that you can take care of yourself, that you have the strength to do all these things that we throw at you. And I went from a healthy 225 before the shooting down to 160 pounds almost overnight. Muscle atrophy set in. I had no muscles. I was missing half of my left lung, so I couldn't even, I didn't have the cardiovascular strength to push my wheelchair down the hallway without stopping to catch my breath. So a lot of things were stacked up against me, and so I began going to the gym at Craig on the weekends, and started working out, building up that strength. And then December 22nd, I was finally released from Craig Hospital. So I made it home before Christmas, which I thought was going to be awesome, and it was. Right, I'm home with the family. The holidays pass. Right, all the friends come in for the holidays, and the first couple weeks there, you have a really good support system, right? I mean, I even had the honor guard in my driveway, and the pipes and drums were in my garage, right? Like it was an amazing experience. Loved all of it. But at some point, this whole support system, they have their own responsibilities, their own families and jobs and things that they have to do. And so I was left there at home alone. And that's when all the mental health stuff started crashing in, right? Because I was alone with my thoughts. And I had a lot of not only why me, but how did this happen? Because I didn't have the memory of it. What did I do wrong? I'm a burden to my family. I'm not going to be able to keep my job, right? They're going to kick me out of the job that I love. All these things started coming in, having depression, anxiety, anger, PTSD, hypervigilance, all those things started creating the suicidal ideation. Like I felt like I thought I would be better if I wasn't here. It'd be better for my family, right? Because I was under the impression that they were going to have to be with me almost all the time to help take care of me, get me to places and stuff, right? Because that's how it was the first 4 or 5 months after getting out of Craig, is she had to take me to all these doctor's appointments because I didn't have a vehicle that I could drive at that time yet. And so all this negativity was playing over and over in my head. And my only coping strategy through the first 16 years of my law enforcement career was running. Like I loved to run, and that's how I coped. And then I couldn't run, right? And so now I'm like, how am I going to? I had no other coping strategy. Nothing else to fall on. So that also contributed to the suicidal ideation and all the other mental health issues. It was getting so bad that Christy said, "Listen, we got to do something, or I can't continue to stay in this relationship because I was taking everything out on her, right? And I have now come to realize that my support system, my family, was very important to me. And by her telling me that, that was my motivation to maybe I should go see somebody, right? And so Christy actually forced me to go see a therapist the first time. But I will tell you, hands down, that's the best thing that has ever happened to me. Just to be able to, well, let me back up. So, unbeknownst to me, the 16 years prior and all those traumatic events that I didn't cope with effectively, exercise is a coping strategy, right? But there's so much more to coping than just that. And that's how I would just shove those emotions away. Well, when this incident happened, it wasn't only this incident, but it was also all these other traumatic events that I had experienced that said, hey, let's relive all these, right? Some of them multiple experiences at the same time. And that's where I really struggled with how to cope with that. And so by going to seek a therapist and to work through this and process it and to appropriately engage the trauma, but then also build healthier coping strategies, that's what pulled me out of that dark hole. It was then in 2017, Zach Parrish, I got shot and died with DCSO. That following year, we went to Police Week. I was also spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. I had a Marine Corps buddy. His name was Matt Johnson. He came out to Craig Hospital to visit me multiple times. Great human being, huge heart, very loud voice. He's just an awesome dude. We went to Police Week together, and this was his first time out at Police Week, and we had a great time. We went to the Nationals baseball game. We went to go visit all the sites. We had a lot of dinners together, spent a lot of good time together, and me just asking him those questions like, what are your plans for the future? And he had all these plans laid out with him and his family, and I'm like, that's really awesome. And then Police Week ended, and a day later, at about 3 a.m, I get a phone call from his wife that he had died by suicide. And then that's when I realized what the hell is going on here, right? Because I had asked him all these questions, and he had great plans for the future, and it looked like he had that hope there, and like he was really gonna do well with him and his family. And when he died by suicide, that's when I realized what my new purpose was going to be, and that was we have got to find a way to fight back against this stigma, to fight back against this suicidal problem we have in this profession and in the military profession too, right? If you look at, there was a study done in 2015 or 16 that examined the number of traumatic events a responder experiences over a career. And this is just for a small to medium-sized agency, and that number is around 188 traumatic events. You compare that number to a civilian that doesn't have any responder or military experience, and over the course of their lifetime, they experience around 4 or 5 traumatic events. So a huge disparity in the amount of trauma that we had. But what we're also really good at, like we are experts at it, is avoiding those emotions and making it seem like we're okay, right? Like we are so good at it. And there's a lot to that, right? We have to be good at it to do our job, but then we also end up just laying that out across both our personal and our professional lives. So now we apply that same method across all aspects of life. So we avoid emotions with our families, right? And we don't shove our emotions down, and we hide what we're really struggling with. And that I learned is what Matt Johnson did. He was extremely good at it because we learn that in this profession, how to be good at that. But what we don't learn is when do you flip that switch off and then go to the other side, right? That's a whole nother coping strategy that we can talk about. But so then he was my motivation to we have got to do something better through my own experiences and through what I had experienced with Matt Johnson, I felt like I had enough ammo to enough energy, enough motivation to now make this my new purpose in my life, right? And I am extremely grateful for DCSO for allowing me to keep my job, right? That's almost unheard of in this profession. I've talked to so many cops across the nation on various things, and when they find out that I'm still a paralyzed cop, they are extremely surprised that how can that even be? Why would your agency even keep you, right? And I do not forget that every single day. I am blessed that they were able to keep me on, and not only keep me on, but now I'm able to fulfill my purpose in a completely different way that I would have never done prior to the shooting. You would have never caught me in here talking about my emotions, right? I would just go run, and then I'll come back like I'm good. But there's power in talking with their emotions, right? That's one of the best ways to change the culture is through sharing personal experiences. That is how we change this culture, to not only normalize it, but to give people permission to, oh, okay, so if he experienced those kind of emotions, then it's okay for me to experience the same kind, right? But it can't just keep coming from my story. And so we share our story in hopes that others will disclose their traumatic events, right? And then we can just snowball it and make it bigger and bigger and have a more impact on our profession, because that's how we change the culture, and that's how we defeat that stigma. And we've done that at DCSO. We shared not only my story, but the Durrells share their story. Rachel Duquette shared her personal story. We try to capture all these other stories that people are going through to share within the agency, to show that, listen, life has an unlimited amount of struggle it's going to throw at you. Like, you can't avoid that piece, right? But what you can do is control how you respond, and how you respond is learning ways to cope and learning how to manage the anxiety and the struggle and to come out better on the other end. Because the only way you learn resiliency is through struggle. And as a profession, if we continue to avoid those struggles by suppressing our emotions and not talking about them and not using healthy coping strategies, we never allow ourselves to become resilient. So you have to, when you're faced with a struggle, you have to apply these principles in order to build your resiliency. And when you build your resiliency, you're now prepared to face that next struggle, which may be worse. And then you just keep growing and growing as a human being and building these really impactful resiliency skills that can get you through anything. And I'm a living example of that, right? I had to learn the very basics of coping strategies, and now I have so many of them in my bucket that it makes me extremely resilient. That doesn't say that there's not times when I wake up and I really hate this wheelchair, right? I mean, there are times I fall back to, God, I hate this wheelchair. It's the worst. And, I start to focus on, I can't hold my wife's hand when we go for a walk. I can't play basketball with my daughters or take them to the daddy-daughter dance, right? Like, all these things, all these emotions and thoughts start flooding my head. But the difference between now and in the past is now I have the skills to be able to shut those thoughts off and to focus on my purpose. Whereas before, I didn't have those skills, and that anger and that frustration would sit with me on a daily basis, and then that would leak out onto my family, right? And now that it's affecting much more than just me. It's affecting the people around me, my support system that I'm supposed to have to get through the struggle. And if I'm damaging them, I'm eroding away my support system. And if we let that continue, I'm just going to be sitting here in isolation, which is a huge component of following through with suicide. A few years ago.
I think it was 2020.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in 2020, both my wife and I, because this is our passion, we decided to get our master's degree in psychology for first responders and veterans, with the sole purpose of being a licensed therapist to help our community with struggles, because we had been through it. We've seen the power in healing, and we wanted to pass that on to help others have that same experience. And so we are almost done with our masters. And then I don't know, we'll see what direction that takes us, but it's again, that part of it definitely helps fill our purpose.
So how did you walk through all of this, being in law enforcement, being with the same agency, being very close when that incident took place? What was that experience?
Well, like Dan said, it was a Friday afternoon, and most Fridays I worked as a sergeant in investigations over the Special Victims Unit, and I was a fairly new sergeant. And Fridays are, chill days, and we weren't expecting much because it was going to be the holiday that next weekend. And we were listening to the radio, the police radio that's piped through our hallways. And this one came out through our dispatch, just a little different. I had been a negotiator at this time for a couple of years and was newly promoted as a team leader on the team. And I felt like we needed to probably get to this one. So negotiators certainly like to do their homework. We want to be able to know what we're getting into, who we're going to be talking to, and we want to get there fairly quick so it doesn't escalate. And on this day, my understanding was Dan was supposed to be working in the afternoon. He worked kind of a swing shift. I had no idea he was even on scene of this incident. And I had grabbed another detective who was a negotiator with me, and I said, let's roll down there. Let's get going and see if we could help. And as we started going, I was the passenger in our van, which travels at like no speed at all. So we called it the snail. Things were getting spun up pretty quickly, and we started going. Radio's blaring. I'm on the phone with a lieutenant, with the other negotiators, making sure that we have a proper team out there where we're gonna meet to do the contact. And I remember traveling down I-25 going northbound, and we had just approached Lone Tree and almost to Lincoln. And I remember seeing the Bearcat behind us with its lights and sirens, and it was screaming past us. And I made a comment because we were, running like a snail's pace. Can you pick up the pace? And that's when I heard that there were shots fired, man down, one of ours. And I remember screaming at the radio, "Who is it?" I didn't no inclination that Dan was even there. So but still, it was one of my brothers or sisters. Who is it? Who is it? And nobody would say on the radio, which actually probably was a smart idea. But a short time later, about 30 seconds or so after screaming at the radio asking who it was, they said DB. DB's been hit. And that's his nickname on the SWAT team and around the metro area. And I melted. I've never felt that way before. It was shocking. It was the feeling of the unknown. My partner that I was with, her name was Melissa. She turned down the radio, and she had me focus on a specific button in the van we were in. It was a horn. And that was probably the best thing I later learned that she could have done was refocus me and focus me on something so kind of minute and small, but important at the same time to get through traffic. I remember it took forever to get there, probably only 10 minutes, but it took forever to get there. I got a phone call from a corporal at the time who was on scene, and he said, "We're at the hospital. Where are you?" And I told him, and I asked him, was Dan wearing his vest? And there wouldn't be a time that he wouldn't be wearing his vest. So to me, when you hear that somebody has been shot, you never know what it is. Okay, he was shot in the arm, he was shot in the leg. is he wearing his vest? And he wouldn't answer me. And I asked him 3 or 4 times, and he wouldn't answer. He said, I'll see you here in a few minutes. And I remember screaming into the ER, and I remember there was a lot of commotion in front of the ER. And remember, the radio had been turned down, so I didn't hear a lot of the ending part of it. And we screamed into the ER, and as I opened the door to get out of the van, I collapsed. My arms and my legs were completely asleep. They had fallen asleep. And I later learned that is just a physiological response to keep all of your blood kind of in your vital organs to your brain. And I couldn't walk. I couldn't even get to the doors. So my partner got me up. She scooped me up. We went through the doors. They were on lockdown, of course, and there was a short debacle there with trying to let me in. And I remember going through those doors and being greeted by the impact unit. And they were all kind of in a line, remember, to my left. There's about 5 or 6 of them. And they didn't look me in the eye. Dan and I are social creatures even before this, and we always believed in just having a strong foundation of friends. So we knew each other on a personal level also with these impact guys, and none of them would look at me. I remember off to the right, there was a lot of commotion going on in an ER room, and the curtains were drawn, so I couldn't see. And they scooped me and they put me back into kind of a smaller room. And I just remember feeling, just what is happening? What is going on? Can I just go see him? And that's when people from all over really started coming in. One of my best friends is a crime analyst at the county. She came in. I also have a really close friend that was a victim assistant. She was there. And my very first, other than in him, because I knew that he was getting treated, was my children. And one of them was at work. She was 19 years old. And the other one was 9. And she happened to be at the same daycare facility. So they were together. But who was going to pick them up? Who was going to take them home? What was I going to do with them for the next couple of days? And a close friend of ours from a neighboring jurisdiction popped his head in. And I said, I need you to go pick up my daughter. He said, you got it. We're done. And he went and he got her, and I didn't have to worry about it. And that was really reassuring. It was very nice to know that people came to your rescue when you needed it the most. Sheriff, at the time, Sheriff Spurlock came in, and we briefly took a moment just to talk about he had been shot and they're working on him. We didn't know any more than that. And do you want to see him? And I absolutely, I want to go see him. And before you know it, they get me up out of the little room I was in, and he had already gone to the OR. So I was unable to see him. Little did I know is that was their window of opportunity to take him up from the first time his heart stopped to the second time his heart stopped. And then he was in the operating room for quite some time through the night. Never seen the amount of law enforcement agencies, fire personnel, dispatchers, VA, you name it, people were there. They were hundreds of people came in. And not to mention our family and our friends were there to support me. It wasn't until early in the morning hours when he was finally wheeled back into his room, and we still didn't know the damage. And at that point in time, it's so foggy. They tell you something, and I just knew that he was alive, and they had told me that his chances of survival overnight were very, very low. And later learned that it was less than 1%. We prayed that night a lot. We stayed with him. He was on 19, I counted, different medications that night. And he was on a vent, and he just wasn't well. He wasn't good. And I stayed with him for nearly the 5 weeks. Parker Hospital did an amazing job with accommodating all of us, because it just wasn't that one day there were hundreds of cops and then they leave. They come every single day. And they made me a room, and I was able to stay right down the hallway from him and be with him. Very hard time the first couple of weeks, up and down with his medical. Said he was going to be on dialysis for the rest of his life because his kidneys had shut down. His strength and determination, he came out of that within a couple of weeks. Perfect kidney function. They said that, he ultimately lost half of his left lung and diaphragm and stomach, part of his stomach, and then it ended up in his spleen, and the spleen kind of was crushed. So they did some major surgery on him, and he had surgeries almost every day, and we just never knew what his body was going to respond to. So on that 11th day or 10th day when he woke up, I remember being in the hospital with Chaplain Ralph, one of our chaplains at Douglas County, and he looked at me, and he had a trach in at this time, and he had no idea what was happening. And he kept doing this when we were talking to him, so he couldn't speak. But we tried to have him write. He couldn't write, but he kept doing this kind of teepee looking thing in the air with his hands. And are you hungry? No, like Taco Bell? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying taco? So we were trying to guess for, the chaplain comes in and he does this, and the chaplain said, pray. He wants you to pray. And Dan's head shook. Yes, pray. And oh, wow. It was, my husband wasn't a spiritual or religious. Neither one of us really were spiritual or religious previous to this. But the things that we could share with you that were only made by one person, one entity. And he certainly showed up for Dan and for me and my family. The next day after Dan was shot, I ended up telling my 9-year-old about the incident. I don't like calling it an accident because it wasn't an accident. He was intentionally shot. And she was fine with it. She's got some resiliency going on. She's just like, oh, okay. I said, if you want to see him, you're more than welcome to come see him. I'll bring you to him. And she's like, no, I'm good. And she started playing. And then a little while later, she's like, yeah, maybe I will see him. And she saw him. She didn't like it because he looks different. And that was kind of it. It's a piece of her still that she still deals with as now a teenager. But we, I think, have provided her some really good resiliency skills and strategies, got her into counseling as well. Also, that very next day is when somebody, I have no idea who it was, but they were brilliant, brought in a counselor. And I remember going down in Parker into some room with her at Parker Hospital, and she introduced herself and she said, I just want to talk. And I remember thinking, this is so odd. Why do you want to, what are we going to talk about? Something just happened to my husband and I have no idea, why do you want me to talk to you about this again? And I never left her side, or she's never left my side since. She's been our therapist ever since. She started with me, and then I slightly nudged my husband to go in that direction.
That's a good word.
Pushed him. And she has been incredible ever since. She's taught us a lot about who we are as humans, as people, as cops, as moms, as dads, sisters and brothers. We've just have excelled since then and learned, but we had to embrace it first. And I think that's the biggest struggle that Dan had, was that he wasn't used to being vulnerable and wasn't used to sharing dark, kind of intricate, not secrets, but emotion. I don't think I had ever seen my husband show any real emotion prior to this. And once I think he understood that it was okay, it's okay we are human, we have these emotions, and to get these out rather than keeping them in. He strived, and he continues to keep striving ever since. And I'm just so proud of him from where he came from. It's incredible what he has done at Douglas County and really around the United States by helping all of these agencies kind of push forward, push through the stigma, and start showing resiliency.
That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Be sure to come back next week for part 2 of this series. We invite you to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion. Until next time, stay safe and remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thank you for your commitment to law enforcement. We're honored to be a part of your journey to success. Let's elevate our call to service together.